When you're familiar with the Bible, particularly the gospel stories of Jesus, it's very easy to read a passage like we have read today and just let it pass you by. You might know the story very well. You may have heard sermons on the passage before many times. And that can sometimes mean that we miss an opportunity to encounter Jesus again in the text of a gospel passage. And as I was preparing for today, I read through that passage, the story from Mark 5, of these two women. I know the passage well, studied it closely in the past, looking at all those details that Mark puts in there and all the behind the scenes stuff on how he crafts his two interweaving stories. And yet, what struck me the most this time as I was reading that text was the tenderness and the mercy of Jesus. There are two women in this story who are both in their own way in a very precarious position. The first we're told about is the daughter of an important man who is named Jairus. He comes to Jesus and he throws himself at Jesus' feet and he begs him to save his child. This must really be quite a serious moment if this important man is willing to embarrass himself in front of the crowds in so public a way. His child is dying, and by the time Jesus gets there, we find out she has already died. To be a 12-year-old girl is a precarious thing in that culture. To be a 12-year-old girl who is dying is even more precarious, and now she has died. She represents something no one else would want anything to do with. At this point, there is only devastation, there is only grief. And then, in the same chapter, we meet another woman. And this woman is also, in her way, on the edge, precarious. Mark tells us that she had been subject to hemorrhages for 12 years and had spent all of her money trying to be made well again. And this isn't a story about bad doctors, although when we read this, I'm very thankful for our NHS. I don't know about you. To spend all your money to be made well and to have no luck is a devastating thing in and of itself. But this story isn't about bad doctors, it's about a woman who would have been put out of her society. To be a woman bleeding in this way would be seen as unclean. And to have been that way for 12 years would have meant she is utterly alone in the world, completely vulnerable. No one would want anything to do with her either. So we have these two people, these two women who are literally the untouchables in their society. A young, dead girl and a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. And in their own individual ways, they encounter Jesus. And they both discover that to encounter Jesus is to meet with the tenderness and the mercy of God. There are lots of details in this reading, and I recommend you go and read it slowly for yourself so you can see all the things that Mark is trying to show us in this text. But one of the key themes in this story is that of touch. The woman with the hemorrhages fights through the crowds and grabs hold to touch Jesus's cloak. And then Jesus, when he gets to Jairus' house, he reaches out and he takes the dead child by the hand and brings her up to life. And that's a fascinating detail, isn't it? And it's interesting as we consider where we have been as a society, as a world now. We've been through a pandemic which has forced us not to touch one another. We've become a people who are hyper aware of touch. I wonder if you've known that instinct to hug someone or shake their hand recently, only to suddenly draw back when you remember we're not really supposed to do that now. It feels unnatural to us somehow, doesn't it, to stop ourselves embracing or shaking a hand or touching others. Touch for us has become a dangerous thing, and we've rightly restricted it for the safety of others. But in Jesus' day, there was a belief that touch would do more than just transfer a virus. If you were classed as unclean in any way, to touch someone is to give them that uncleanness. To touch someone is to make a connection with them. And we know that touch is a social bonding mechanism. It's a means of breaking the distance between yourself and someone else and embracing and coming close to people. There's a lot we could say about this thing. And Jesus does it all the time, even when he's not supposed to. The woman with the hemorrhages reaches out to touch him, and she only gets his cloak, and yet immediately she is healed. Jesus should have turned around and been really upset by this. He should have rebuked her, and he should have rejected her for infecting him with her shame. But that's not how the story goes. When he turns around and he looks at this woman, he praises her for her faith. His power, which is the power to bring life, has flowed into her brokenness and has brought her healing. He isn't infected by her shame. Her sickness and her shame has been infected by his mercy and his life. And then Jesus says something which for me is one of the most beautiful things in this story that Mark has given us. He says this, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." He calls her daughter. He includes her when others have rejected her. He sends her away to live in peace. And what does Jesus do when he encounters the girl who is now dead? He again does the unthinkable. He takes her by the hand and brings her up to life. You don't touch dead bodies. You don't even go into the same room as one. And here is Jesus reaching out to touch this young girl so that she might come back to life. Death doesn't infect him. He infects death with his life. Friends, this is who Jesus is. He is the one who reaches out to those precarious ones, those who shouldn't be touched, those who shouldn't be noticed, and he brings into their life healing and hope and mercy. He is tender, he is kind, he is fully aware of the trauma that these women have faced, and in his kindness he releases them from their social stigma, and he brings them into his family through his love and through his healing. And that same Jesus comes to us today too. He is the one who responds to our brokenness and our shame with that same kindness and that same mercy. And I wonder what that means for you today. What things have you carried with you, perhaps even for 12 years, maybe more than 12 years, like that woman? What things have you considered, have you felt kept you on the outside? What things have made you feel like you're never quite welcomed in, never quite part of things? Where in your life do you feel dead? Do you feel there's no hope left? Let me encourage you today to bring all of those things and to place them before Jesus. Let me encourage you to find the faith like that woman, to reach out and grab his hem, and to know that in his kindness and in his mercy, He won't reject you, but he will touch your life and he will call you daughter. He will call you son. He is aware of the trauma that we carry. He knows the ways we have felt rejected. He sees the parts of us that we are ashamed of, and in his mercy, in his kindness, he wants to offer you and me freedom from it all. And I pray that you encounter that freedom today as you're listening. I pray that you know that this isn't just for someone else, this is for you. May you encounter Jesus today and be healed, and may your life be restored to you again. There is in this story another bigger story being told, as there always is in Mark's Gospel. Jesus is the perfect representation of God. To see him is to see who God is most clearly. And I believe what we have seen in this story today is that God really isn't worried about the rules that we set to keep the unclean and the clean separate from one another. He isn't going to let someone's social status or what we think of them get in the way of their healing. Rather, in Jesus, God reaches out to us, to me, to you, and brings me healing and you healing from my sin and my shame. And he restores us to who we are, to our right selves, and he calls us children. And so while, yes, we can find great comfort from this story, we must also hear the challenge of it as well. Will we do the same? As followers of Jesus, will we be the same with those that we encounter on our journey? The question is, if we were in the crowd, would we have pushed the woman aside? If we were with those outside Jairus' house, would we be laughing at the things Jesus is saying? Would we gasp when he reaches out to touch these two untouchable women? In other words, what things might we be putting in the way of others as they seek to encounter Jesus? Friends, let's do whatever we can to extend that embrace of tenderness and mercy to others. As we have been met by it ourselves, may we share it with those we meet on our journey. Let's be determined to help them find Jesus, not get in their way, to take them to the source of their healing, to the expression of who God is and that loving mercy of the compassionate one. And above all, let's give thanks for Jesus, the one who is tender with our wounds and offers us mercy that covers our shame and brings us to fullness of life. Amen.